It's crazy to think that there's probably no game with more controversy than Assassin's Creed Shadows. This game isn't just facing backlash from Western audiences, it's also disliked by the Japanese people, the very people Ubisoft is trying to represent. Ubisoft did such a poor job researching Japanese culture that many Japanese players find it offensive. It's the complete opposite of what Ghost of Tsushima achieved, where the lead developer even named the ambassador of the city of Tsushima. So bad that it even caught the attention of the Japanese government. Now, I'm not here to review this game as you can find plenty of it from other creators. Also because I can play the game personally because it's impossible to run this game with my current hardware. Anyway, if you search the internet where the biggest controversy surrounding Assassin's Creed Shadow coming from, you'll likely find that the answer to be Yasuke. When information first leaked that he would be one of the protagonists in the next Assassin's Creed game, the controversies surrounding it have only continued to pile up. Of course, you could say that many of these controversies come from the haters, but even haters have their limits. I mean, every game has its fair share of criticism, yet the backlash against this game is on another level. And from the looks of it, Yasuke is the least of AC Shadow's problem. Now, the biggest debates that always arises whenever there's a new Assassin's Creed controversy is whether the series stays historically accurate. Frankly, the way Ubisoft treats this series history problem is ambiguous. At times, they claim it's not historically accurate, which is supported by some in-game portrayals, but on the other hand, they also try to convince players that they strive for authenticity as much as possible. For AC Shadows, the historical accuracy debate is mainly centered around Yasuke, whom Ubisoft promotes as the first black samurai. While I believe he did exist in Japanese history, Ubisoft portrayed him as a full-fledged samurai rather than just a retainer, which many sources claim that it was his actual role. History doesn't explicitly mention him being a samurai, largely because there isn't much historical record about him at all. This has led to counter-argument stating that Assassin's Creed has never been entirely historically accurate due to some of its creative liberty the writer made. Also some of the fantasy elements in it. Both of these arguments have valid points, but there's one important thing that not many people consider, which is Ubisoft Discovery Tour mode. This mode exists in Origin, Odyssey and Valhalla, which allow players to explore and learn history using the game's assets. In their website, it says that the Discovery Tour series is made of dedicated games that let visitors freely roam ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and the Viking Age to learn more about their history and daily life. Students, teachers, non-gamers, and players can discover these eras at their own pace, or embark on the guided tours and stories curated by historians and experts. This shows that Ubisoft knows that this franchise can be used to learn about history and culture. Ubisoft needs to make things extremely clear whether this series is focusing on historical accuracy or not. You can't just leave fans in the dark, unsure whether this historical information they get from the game is accurate or not. So they shouldn't be surprised when people take issue with how history is depicted, especially when they actively promote historical education through Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour. Because if people think that you try to educate people through your IP and you happen to take some creative liberty, people might misinterpret your intent and accuse you of altering history. Not only that, but it's also offensive when a person or a part of history is portrayed incorrectly. Now imagine a studio making a movie about your family but portraying them poorly. Would you be okay with that? If you are, then there's no problem. They have your permission to do so. But if you're not, then they shouldn't do it, as they don't have the right to misrepresent something that personally affect you. If previous game included portrayals that could be considered offensive but were generally accepted, then it might not have been an issue at all. Which leads us to the star of the show, Yasuke. There's no direct mention that he is a samurai, so people question Ubisoft's intent by claiming that he is one. This would lead to some people not liking Ubisoft's decision for making Yasuke a samurai. Okay, first of all, personally for me, the concept of a black samurai sounds badass, and I'm not lying when I say that he has a potential to be a good protagonist when at least followed up with a decent writing. I know it's modern Ubisoft game, so we can expect much, but having a small historical reference could help the writer to take more creative liberty on his story. Yes, there are bad actors who simply doesn't want a black character like Yasuke in this game. But claiming that all of those criticisms are simply opinion from racists is just ignorance, avoiding the complexity of the issue. Because if we look at the context and the setting of the game, it's rational that there are people who don't like this. As far as I can think of, there are three things that I believe the reason why people are not happy with the decision. Okay, let me explain it to you. First one is probably the most obvious one, that being Yasuke become the center of a culture war. Yasuke's history is largely undocumented, which is why many people didn't even know about him before Assassin's Creed Shadow. Given the current state of the gaming industry, where developers frequently push diversity for the sake of diversity, it's no surprise that people assume Ubisoft's decision was another example of forced inclusivity. Forced inclusivity in video games often leaves a bad taste, because when done poorly, it results in a shallow character who lacks the depth to fit naturally into the setting or even be likable. Too often, characters are added just to check a diversity box rather than to serve a meaningful narrative purpose. Another factor fueling Yasuke's controversy is Ubisoft's decision to make a foreigner one of the protagonists in a game set in feudal Japan. This choice means that players are essentially forced to kill Japanese people while playing as him, something that doesn't sit well with many Japanese players, especially given the rising case of disrespectful behavior from foreigner visitors in Japan. Even Ubisoft seemed to acknowledge this issue, as they censored the Japanese version of the game, a move that only adds to the controversy. Second is that people have expectation. If you look at the history of Assassin's Creed game, the choice of the main protagonist's ethnicity has usually made sense within the setting, even when the character was an outsider of that place. Albeit not much, having mentioned in Japanese history, Yasuke, for me at least, makes sense to be included in this game. The issue is that Yasuke was an African man in a time and place where most people wouldn't expect to see someone like him. His presence in feudal Japan is a historical anomaly, which naturally catches some people off guard. When players think of a game that's set in Japan, they typically imagine a male Japanese protagonist, especially given how games like Sekiro and Ghost of Tsushima have shaped expectation for the setting. On top of that, many players are passionate about Japanese culture, and when they step into a historical Japanese themed game, they naturally expect to experience the story through the lens of a native character. Some might argue that Naoe, the other protagonist, fulfills this role. But even if she were replaced with a male Japanese lead and Yasuke still remained, question will still arise about why he was still chosen. Yasuke's unique historical circumstance make him an unexpected choice, which adds to the confusion rather than creating a seamless historical immersion that Assassin's Creed is known for. Some people argue that criticism over the lack of Japanese protagonists ignores Naoe's presence, and is just an excuse for disliking female leads. However, I don't think that's entirely true. While there are people who dislike female protagonists, most players have shown they are fine with them. The Assassin's Creed series has featured multiple female assassins since at least Syndicate, and players didn't seem particularly bothered. In Odyssey, many even preferred Cassandra over Alexios. Expectation drives this criticism because when people imagine a game set in feudal Japan, they naturally expect to play as a native Japanese character, and Yasuke's presence disrupts that expectation. To put it into perspective, imagine if Assassin's Creed's origin, instead of featuring an Arabian protagonist, had you play as a Japanese samurai. It would feel like an odd choice that clashed with what people envision for that setting. The biggest issue, in my opinion, is Ubisoft's decision to make Yasuke a full-fledged samurai right from the start, because I believe this is the very reason why people have pushed back against Ubisoft's decision. People are getting used to seeing a samurai being a Japanese person, and making Yasuke as one sparked some controversies, which also related to people's expectation. If Ubisoft promote Yasuke as a foreigner that arrived on Japan who then learn their culture, people might think that it is more understandable. The reasoning behind Ubisoft's decision on making Yasuke as the main character doesn't make much sense either. Ubisoft Quebec wanted to include a samurai, and Yasuke's story was open-ended enough to allow for creativity. There are still plenty of questions and speculation surrounding him. The fascinating facts, though, were undisputable. Of African origin, he arrived in Japan enslaved by the Portuguese. From what I've seen, though, there is not much creative liberty Ubisoft take, because I just explained it to you his backstory. Yes, Ubisoft doesn't do much creative liberty into his background. Multiple reviewers also mentioned that Yasuke's story isn't just as compelling as Naoe. Almost feels like he is disconnected from the settings. That's really unfortunate, considering the potential Ubisoft had to make his character work. Imagine if Yasuke turns out as an assassin from the start, that came from Africa and willingly come to Japan to establish his faction of assassins to fight the Templars. Personally, I think it would have been more interesting to what we currently have, creating more twists toward his backstory. They also explain that he offers a unique perspective on the period. Players can discover Japan alongside him. However, instead of exploring his journey of adapting to Japanese culture and the way of the samurai, a story that could have been more deeply engaging, Ubisoft rushed the moment where he trained as a samurai before giving him 6-month time skip. This robs the game of a great narrative opportunity. Imagine how much more immersive it would have been if players experienced Yasuke gradually learning and integrating into Japanese society, facing struggles along the way. This would have provided a natural way to showcase the historical and cultural aspect of the era, while also giving Yasuke meaningful character development. It's like playing a game where your character is already max leveled from the start. Ubisoft has essentially cut out what could have been a great narrative. Besides, you can still learn a lot about Japanese culture just fine through a Japanese character like Jin Sakai in Ghost of Tsushima. How Ubisoft handled the dual protagonist is not that good either. While having two protagonists, Naoe as the classic shinobi and Yasuke with the samurai playstyle is an interesting idea on paper, but it doesn't work as well in practice. Why would you play a character who lacks assassin abilities in a game centered around assassination, especially when the gameplay and level design are more tailored for stealth? Considering that Assassin's Creed combat hasn't improved much in a long time, Yasuke's gameplay feels far less engaging compared to Naoe, thus making Yasuke as an inferior choice gameplay-wise. Seriously, one of the most iconic aspects of Assassin's Creed game is their parkour, and the fact that Yasuke can do it really hurt his character in this game. We already have very few stealth-focused games right now, and if Ubisoft had doubled down on improving the stealth mechanic, they could have filled the gap in the market. These two characters doesn't seem to work seamlessly together, and honestly, I can recall the last time a game with two protagonists pulled it off successfully. It would have been better if we only have Yasuke or Naoe only as a protagonist, as it will focus the story much better. Sekiro and Ghost of Tsushima also did much better job of allowing players to approach gameplay with both direct combat and stealth using a single protagonist. Ubisoft is very close to saving themselves from financial ruin with Icy Shadows. Ubisoft could absolutely avoid all this culture altogether if they play along with the people's expectation, because they're unfortunately not in a position where upsetting people is the most profitable choice. Because I do believe that if they actually try to appeal towards people's expectation and having male Japanese protagonists, some people would assume that Ubisoft has changed and probably they will ignore the rest of the controversies. Call me crazy, but despite being mid in general, modern Assassin's Creed gameplay is just enough to satisfy gamers, especially modern ones. Only when they have nothing else to play. If you turn off your brain and skips all the cutscenes, you might actually have fun with this game. People already asking for an AC games that sets in Japan, and all they had to do is giving what people want. Ubisoft literally sits on a gold mine and they choose to take out the rocks and leave the gold behind. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you don't like it. And I would appreciate it if you also hit that subscribe button too. Take care and I'll see you in the next one.